figure it out. connection, so I drew a little bit about it.
All right. 5:15, we'll go ahead and start the work session for USD 417 Board of Ed. Mr. Doty, do you want to start off with any thoughts, or we just want to jump in here?
Yeah, so what I presumed we would do, probably to make this the most efficient and collaborative, was we created a Google Doc that I shared with everybody prior to the meeting with some guiding questions that the administrative team felt were important that we answer those tonight, provide some clarity as we move forward to our planning for the next school year. So since this is a work session, there's no action obviously from this meeting, but this is an open and collaborative meeting where everybody can speak freely, administrative team can speak, you don't have to be asking questions, if you have input you want to give, trying to give it, same thing, board members, it's just an open dialogue like we've done in the past. We've had other work sessions similar to goal planning and strategic planning and so forth. So with that being said, if everybody has access to it, I'm going to throw those questions up on the screen, share it. Bryce is going to record as we go through what our outcome is, our consensus is as we build that for each question. And I'm sure other questions will probably pop up as we go from this, but you can add those to it as we go. Does that sound good?
Yep.
What I figure we do is just work our way down the list, and as new ones come up, put them on there and discuss them as we go and come to a consensus on each one as we move down the list.
Okay. So the first one may or may not be the big one, I guess. We'll see how this goes. But should students be required to wear a mask at school? And again, we're talking about, just to clarify, this is starting in the fall 2021-2022 school year, which sounds crazy to say those numbers, by the way. But we're not talking about summer. We're not talking about what we're doing right now today. What we're talking about tonight will be what happens come fall. Okay. Just make sure we're all on the same page with that. So start out, should students be required to wear a mask? Aaron's got a thought there that he thinks possibly a no or probably a no, but we need to make sure that we're all on the same page. So thoughts, comments on that item? Do I feel differently? All right, easy enough. So just to confirm with a nod from board members, we agree that as of today, I think that's an important piece also, is that as of today, and what we know today, we feel like students shouldn't have to wear a mask at school. Would everyone agree with that, starting in the fall?
And I think that's an important commentary. Thanks for making as we know, the pandemic needs to change. So if we have a resurgence and Dana feels very strongly about something, she may make recommendations to us to bring to you. Or if we have an admin team feel very strong about something, or if you as board members feel very strong about something, or if our health department or KDHE mandates something, we may have to reconvene. But as of right now, based on the numbers and where we're at in the pandemic, I think that's a consensus. It's very reasonable.
Okay. Very good. So the second one is, should staff be required to wear a mask at school? Non-vaccinated versus vaccinated, and do we want to differentiate between junior, senior high school and the elementary schools? Thoughts on that one?
We would like to differentiate between the two.
Okay.
Like to have that conversation.
Okay.
Would you like to start it?
Yeah, go ahead. So I'm not asking a leading question.
I think that it is probably more safe to say that there could be non-vaccinated staff at Council Grove Junior Senior High School because all the students can be vaccinated if they choose to be. That is not true at the elementary.
And a part of the conversation that came up in our discussions is still the quarantine issue. Because that is still mandated. We have no control for everything else. We have say in as a governing body, or the board had say as a governing body in that, except for quarantine. So that was the concern that popped up in our discussions, is if we have an unvaccinated adult in the classrooms, and we're back, depending on how some of the other questions go, we're back to business as normal, no social distancing, back to a small group, settings and those things, which would be good. We need to get back to some sense of normalcy so we can get to our MTSS intervention groups and things. But we do run that risk of having a mass quarantine again, depending on if that all would be vaccinated and if they had a mask on. So I put that under, I didn't know where to quite put it in here. I did put what the county health officer's recommendations were, and then what still the guidelines for quarantining are that we would have to follow. They communicated with them on that and posted it here underneath number 2, the social distancing. So for quarantining, this is if not masked and unvaccinated, regular quarantine guidelines will apply. Exposure meaning 6 feet for 10 minutes per KDHE, and quarantine would equal 10 days if no symptoms develop, per the Morris County Health Officer. The CDC guidance for unvaccinated people is still wear masks. Dr. Freeze would like to follow that. Furthermore, Dr. Freeze added that unvaccinated individuals that are wearing a mask and are 3 feet in proximity from a positive case would not have to quarantine.
I like to take exception with that. The CDC does not recommend masks anymore. It's a 3-foot guideline that they're recommending. The National Institute of Health does not recommend wearing masks. There's all kinds of virologists in different organizations that do not suggest wearing masks, especially with kids.
Yeah, that I'm just putting what he said. That masking has no governance over masking. This is only the quarantine.
And I read that, but when he's stating that is not correct.
I don't want to jump too far ahead, but if we're going to talk about the quarantine period, should we wait? Because that seems like that's further down in the list.
Yeah, there's no particular order on there. We can skip over one if that feels prevalent. Everybody.
I would like to stay here if that's possible and just hear a little bit more from the admin team what your thoughts are around this. If anyone's willing to share, I understand the difference. I would guess you visited about it. I don't know.
I think it might be helpful for people to understand that they're very much tied to one another. And the social distancing didn't just involve separating desks 6 feet apart, although it did. So we would very clearly need to know that or not in terms of getting furniture either back in the rooms or not. But it also affected some instructional practices. We did not do small groups. We didn't do partner work. We didn't do cooperative learning. The kids did not travel to art and music, for example, at the elementary school. The teachers traveled to the room so that we could keep contact tracing and stable groups in place. Lunch happened in the classrooms at secondary, and breakfast happened in the room. So I just think that people need to understand that this isn't a simple, social distancing doesn't just mean that the desks were 6 feet apart in the classrooms. It affected several things. Instructionally, we did very well. We kept on site for the most part. Our scores were very good at the end of the year. We're very, very proud of what our students and teachers did. But we would like to bring, if at all possible, some of those instructional practices back. Small group and partner work and cooperative learning, which have really high effect sizes. So that's something that is a consideration for all of us, is about bringing some instructional practices back that we didn't do for a year.
We talked about during those times, if you're having a small group, would it be appropriate then to have the staff member put a mask on, because then they're in that close proximity with students? Would it make sense to have some different type of rules than just saying you have to wear a mask all the time? We did talk about some different scenarios like that.
Do you think the staff would grasp that, would take that on, or would we get pushback that why do I have to wear one at all?
I think that the possibility of mass quarantines, for if you don't wear one and you're teaching a small group, but then that whole small group is, if somebody's exposed, all of those students are going home, and the management of that was very difficult for staff, keeping up with kids coming and going and the large amounts that were happening. And I think that that is incentive to protect your kids while you're teaching that small group. And our teachers want to protect our kids. You know, that's just who they are.
Sure.
I guess I don't feel like we would have pushback for that instructional practice that we do. Our teachers do want small group time back. They do want cooperative learning and all of those things that, you know, those younger kids, pulling them onto the carpet with you, and that engagement piece. A lot of that was lost this year. And if that's kind of like what we did this year, whatever it took to keep our kids here with us, I think that's our staff's mindset.
The other factor is that we had policies, what do you call them, Erin, with the leave policies that we had in place this year that allowed people to have lots of days that they could take, and if they were quarantined or they were ill or their kids were ill, and that will not be in place this year.
That's a family first coronavirus relief act that provides 10 additional sick days, to anybody who's quarantined or positive. And it also allowed your children who are quarantined or positive additional time on top of that. We had 3,500 hours. I did the math on it. We had 3,500 hours between our classified and certified. I have it broken down by building and by classified and license. But total as a district, 3,500 hours of family first relief act. That's a significant, which that, like Kelly's saying, that would not be something we would be using their own leave for this year if they're quarantined. So 10 days mandatory, that's 10 days sick leave. We have some that use up all our sick leave. Yeah. But they just have to be aware of that. And that brings up another conversation Mike and I kind of had today, talking about leave without pay. We did have a significant amount of leave without pay used this year, some for the right reasons, some for the wrong reasons. Probably the majority just due to running out of time. So for classified staff, especially, they earn a day basically every pay period. So do we upfront, do we front load their pay, and then are there leave without pay, or their PTO, paid time off, sick leave, so forth, so they can manage that better and see that how it works. Maybe they need it in the beginning, they have it. We just have to set some parameters in that where if we do that, there's work agreements in the contract that say, you know, let's say someone uses all 10 days and gets semester to quit, well, then we'll deduct their final paycheck because they didn't earn those days. You know, we just have to have some language that holds everybody accountable for that, with the expectations up front. But that would be a concern with classified staff, not having enough vacation to sick leave to quarantine quarantine or if they had to. So front loading that might be something valuable, which would be a change in our practice and what we've done.
Question that I have is that you mentioned staff here, so I'm assuming that you're also meaning cafeteria staff in this conversation as well. We're not just talking teachers in the classroom, we're talking everyone. And I think even given our conversation that we had over the summer, cafeteria staff may be a different conversation in and of itself as well.
Yeah.
Looking ahead, so when it says staff, I mean, I think we also need to be looking at the different groups.
Absolutely. Well, and that classified, pretty broad range, whether it's custodian who may have limited contact with students, to a para A who may be running intervention groups and having prolonged exposure to groups of students based on what their duties are. So yeah, it's not a one size fits all, sure, possibly. It could be, depending on what direction you want to go with it.
Okay, here comes the old teacher in me. Is there any concern from a negotiated agreement standpoint if we separate those two groups? Will one group of teachers say that they're being mistreated over another?
Technically, no, but obviously, like we said in the beginning of all this, no matter what decision is made, there's going to be people upset, sure, regardless. That's just welcome to public service, right? So, but technically, from a negotiated agreement standpoint, there is nothing listed in that would prohibit or limit. And then based on the Equal Opportunity Employer Act, like we talked about before, places of employment have that right to do it if they choose to do so. They just need to make sure we justify why we're doing it. They're have good causation. If we don't, then we're not doing it the right way.
I really think it's a clear separation of the building that students are in, more so than just which staff you are. If you're in the building where the kids are that haven't had the chance for vaccination, if they choose to, then I feel like that's different than being in a building where they've had the opportunity.
Sure.
I think the other thing that is important to keep in the forefront of our minds is how many human beings we're talking about here. It may seem simple when you think about one classroom, but we're talking about 900 human beings. We're not talking about, a class of 12 and one teacher. We have almost 200 employees and we have about almost 800 kids. So we're talking about a lot of human beings. So we're not making this decision for one adult or one child. We're making it for to protect and be safe, which is what we do every day from the moment they get on the bus or enter our doors. We protect them and to keep them safe. We already require vaccinations and both students and adults. So it's not like an unusual thing. This is unusual, but we're talking about a lot of humans, and safety is something that this is what we do every year, we always have. So I think sometimes people forget how many people we're talking about.
I do think also that it's important to note that like elementary age students should have that opportunity for vaccination. I really think it'll come early fall. So I don't think we'll be looking at too far into the school year where not everybody would have that chance.
And just provide some clarification there, 'cause I know there's a lot of misinformation out there. I don't think anywhere anybody's ever made a recommendation that we say kids have to be vaccinated. Let's make sure that's a parent choice. Right? Yeah. We've seen some emails that are pretty upset from people saying they've been told we're going to make kids have it, the vaccine. That's just simply not true. So I want to make sure if we have this conversation is precedent with, that's a family choice. We would never, and we don't have the right to do that, even if we wanted to, we can't do that. So until the legislature adds it to the mandatory vaccine list, that's pretty clear they won't at this point in time. So it's a parent choice. Absolutely.
We have about 60% of the staff that elected to get vaccinated. last I heard.
60.
Yeah, it was in the 60th percentile of the entire district staff. And I will admit, I've not looked at that for about a month, so I don't know if that's
I
changed.
just
or
always
not.
remember from a previous conversation.
Right.
That's where we're at.
It's a bad.
So I don't think you're gonna ever get 100%. Because you have, some people have no moral objection to it, and that's their right. Then are we making policy around that 30% for staff members? Or that 30% or 40% of the students that choose not to? I was rounding up, hoping more people that got that. The 70, we're hoping we're closer to that. So, I mean, are we, for lack of better term, are we punishing the majority for the objections of the minority? Well, not everybody gets the flu shot either. And so we're not saying, okay, you got to wear your mask and you didn't have the flu shot. And you got to stay over here, you didn't have the flu.
But all of our students have the option of getting out.
Right, and like I said, the majority are gonna have that option.
Yeah.
And from all the data that's out there, especially in the elementary students, they have very little risk, if any, and very little infection rate. So once again, are we making policy based on a very small minority, or what's good for the whole?
Because I was looking at it more from the standpoint of not based on what individuals choose to do, but based on options individuals have to do. You know what I mean? So like, that's why we segregated it out on here, the high school, junior high versus elementary for this conversation, just because everyone at the high school level, and junior high level has had an opportunity now, time school starts. That's just what we kept going back in our discussion, with the elementary level, the parents haven't had a choice yet. So that's why we list them separate. It could be a one size fits all, and that's just the way we roll, or it could be a segregated out based on what's available for families to choose and have the option to do. And it could, like Dana said, we've read stuff as late as maybe February 22, but then I think that's starting to get ramped back up a little sooner, starting here fall.
Yeah, most of the data right now is saying fall, but I think very based on the testing.
But once that comes, it's really all basically the same as what we're talking about here. Once everyone has the option, really, much we can do anything at that point, because people have a choice. We're not affecting students' ability to go to school or not. If you not told it's not food. You get sick and are out to eat some food.
It's your choice.
Right.
And that go back to my statement beforehand, but it's come out of here recently with Dr. Fauci. And got an email saying masks don't affect it, they don't help it, they don't stop the spread of it. The National Institute of Health has been saying that for a long time. We're all just all over the country been saying that. Even the CDC's come out saying, hey, you don't have to wear masks.
If
So
you're dealing with vaccinated, Scott, or I've not seen that data from CDC on unvaccinated.
if you're vaccinated, yes.
Okay.
But like I said, if you're vaccinated, we're talking about, we're gonna tell everybody, you gotta wear a mask.
No, that's not.
No one's.
That's what I was hearing from it. We were gonna say,
Sorry, that's why we listed non-vaccinated staff versus vaccinated and separate it.
because if you're, in my opinion, if you're, and then I've also heard concerns about requiring people to prove that they're vaccinated. But if you're vaccinated, a student, staff member, I don't see a reason to require you to have to wear, to do that.
Yeah, that's
Yeah,
what
we all
we're
agree
saying.
with that.
We're on the same page.
Our big concern was if we had unvaccinated staff around elementary students who haven't had a chance to be vaccinated in a closed setting, should we require a mask in that situation? That's why we have it separated.
Vaccinated don't have to quarantine.
Right.
That's not an issue.
So let me just rephrase what I think I've heard you guys kind of insinuate, that for the elementary school, potentially we could put something in where unvaccinated adults would put on a mask when they're in close proximity with kids.
That's something we have talked about, yes. It would protect the kids who have not had a choice to be vaccinated.
And that, in hopes, would be temporary, waiting for that opportunity to come for kids to get that vaccine, which could be fall or could be later. But I guess that feels like maybe the least restricted, if that's the terms that we kind of go back to. So am I paraphrasing, am I condensing that kind of in what you guys think. Board thoughts, comments on that? Is that something we can live with, that we can grasp? Are you kind of okay with that? Opposition to that?
Statement up there, so we all see it. So we know, we'll talk about it.
I guess one of my questions would be, what kind of proof of vaccination are we going to have?
You guys got access to it.
Yeah.
We talked about last.
I mean, the majority of our staff that have been vaccinated, got vaccinated here at the clinic we have. So I do have that large list. And then, you know, I also have access to look up if the staff member says, yes, I was vaccinated, look up my name and then I can.
Specific about within quarantine guidelines. The quarantine guidelines take effect. They don't have to have knowledge or stand up front teaching the social distance. It will be that.
And within a distance that would require quarantine.
So yeah, working around students when quarantine guidelines would be effective. Be in effect.
Okay.
That makes sense. That's saying it right. But it's the quarantine guidelines be in effect until, then we can add to that until parents have the option to vaccinate their students. Because in that way, so after that happens, that goes away.
Dana, right now, are they leaning toward one shot or two for under 12?
Well, right now it's still the two, because that's the only one that's been, you know, approved that look, not approved, but authorized so far.
Okay.
Moderna and Pfizer are both actually putting in for full approval. And right now Johnson & Johnson's kind of on hold. So right now it looks like it's the two.
So we have 5 week window for start.
They get their first one, and then depending on which one, probably Pfizer in 3 weeks, and then 2 weeks after that. So
The doses have got to be different in small humans, though, right? And it's
I
still
honestly
2
don't know the doses yet. I've not seen
I
them.
wouldn't think it'd be the same as, 300 pound.
Yeah,
You know.
I'm sure it varies. I've just not heard what they're looking at so far for the other ones. But it just wouldn't surprise me if they still do it in 2 separated doses.
Everybody read that, the last news statement there. Let's make sure we're all thinking of it the same way and on the same page.
Thoughts on the blue comment there? Everybody okay with that?
I'm okay with it, but I would like to pose the question to the admin team around what happens when someone isn't wearing their mask, because I know that's going to, my assumption is that someone's going to press the issue. And I'm just wondering what all have we talked about, because I think back when we took an oath to become teachers and educators, our one job, the very first thing they said to us was, you'll protect kids at all costs. So my hope would be that no one presses the issue. However, I'm just wondering what kind of support you talk about in managing this.
Jumping in time, I don't have the words of those now, but we've had multiple conversations about that, and we gave a lot of grace at the beginning. But bottom line, if you pass this, it will fall. And it would be treated the same as if, what if the staff member walks in and let them work late every day? When they leave their classroom unattended. So it would get to the point, probably first one will be a verbal type warning. And then next time it'll probably be a written reprimand and a personnel conversation about it. But it is a board policy. So if we don't take it lightly, then why do it?
Right.
But if we're gonna pass something, then we need to be accountable for all of us.
Thank you, that, I wanted to ensure in my own mind, we talked about that, and there's some support for administrators. around that.
It was hard this year. I mean, I'll be honest, it was extremely hard because you don't want to turn it into a negative situation. You want to be punitive if you're going, but at the same time, it's a policy. So it's like, we try to give a lot of grace this year and just get through the year and have conversations individually about making it positive. I think we'll pass that point now, going into next year.
Well, I think sometimes, like you said, offering grace, because I'll be the first one to admit, I have lost 3/4 of the way down the hallway and one of my teachers is gone. And it's hanging around my neck, and I'm like, oh, because I forgot to put it on. It happens. And so I think obviously having that conversation is, hey, you're in a small group, you need to have that, oh, you know, they'll get it. I've never had a confrontation with a teacher when I've said, hey, put your mask on. They'll most likely go, oh my gosh, I forgot it's hanging around my neck and I didn't put it on. So it's just having that conversation with them. And then if it gets to it becoming an issue with someone repeatedly, you know, that's when we'll start having some more stern conversation.
All right, other comments or questions on section B on staff? Okay. Visitors, should they be required to wear one in the building if they're not vaccinated? Again, do we want to differentiate the buildings?
And I think too, this doesn't have to be an umbrella. We could talk about, like we talked in elementary school, if someone wanted to come and he went to their child and say, and they're not vaccinated. There's no reason they couldn't go to a room that's not being used by others. They won't take their mask off. Yeah, I think that kind of goes back to the other statement that we're talking about, that around groups of kids and quarantine guidelines would be in place. I don't think it has to be a one size fits all. It could be a situation where someone has to come in, they can take their mask off, leave their kid, in the classroom by themselves, but not around the kid.
And I think it's important for everybody to know that we want people back in the buildings. I mean, we have missed the parents and we've missed the visitors. We want people back in the building. So, but we don't want to put any children who have not had the opportunity to be vaccinated at risk either. So, but we want visitors back. We want the buildings to not be, you know, because they have.
Part of our community culture, obviously, we welcome people to do. We want volunteers, and we want them during the happen. We want parents and grandparents to really work with their kids. So absolutely, that's the goal.
So do we think that would be on an honor system, or are we going to ask secretaries to ask that question?
That's discussion. I mean, I that goes into, I would hate to be personally for me, a vaccine police.
Right.
I think it's an individual. I mean, we've seen how well the honor system works in mass groups, but individually, if the parent comes in and secretary is that part of the protocol, take the temperature, ask the questions, and get anywhere else, you go on your screen, you've been vaccinated, they say yes, then that's on them, you know, and then if they're not, and it's comes down to the point where they're positive and we end up getting some kids quarantined from it, then that individual have to answer to the county health.
Well, and at that point, we may have to be forced to change how we handle things as well.
Someone may ruin it for everyone.
Right.
Couldn't someone still come in and be vaccinated and say, yes, I've been vaccinated, and still get sick with COVID and you have to quarantine a bunch of kids? I mean, isn't that still something that can happen? Because we're not saying you definitely don't ever get COVID if you've been vaccinated, right? Okay. So
So from what, correct me if I'm wrong, Dan, but what I understand is if someone's vaccinated, the quarantine guidelines don't apply to that individual's vaccinated.
The risk is so low.
Right. So,
but
But they could,
You're saying.
if that
somebody
person,
else gets-
I could make a student quarantine, is what I think is what you're
yeah,
saying.
that's what I'm saying. It really changes nothing. Let's say I'm not vaccinated and I lie and I come in and I have it, and then you have to quarantine my 2 kids that I had lunch with and then whatever else, then, or if I really was vaccinated and I still got COVID, isn't it the exact same situation?
It's not exactly the same because the vaccinated person is much less likely to, you know, and that viral load probably not near as high for that vaccinated person as well, but you're right,
So
but they
you
still could.
quarantine kids.
Yes, yes.
You're saying the person as possible,
Right,
vaccinated or not.
right.
So could we avoid that by maintaining social distancing with visitors in school buildings?
It's gonna be the social distance police, though. That's, again, you know,
Or social distance buildings, but, I think that if anything else, we could come up with some guidelines if someone's going to come into a classroom to read to children, in kindergarten, they'll be there for more than 15 minutes. So maybe they could be outside of that 3-foot distance. But also, this summer, when visitors have been in the school building, already come age, not able to get vaccinated, and adults who are vaccinated, there's lots of intermingling within the social distancing guidelines. So I think that we may have already kind of not set a precedent, but that's already happened in our buildings this summer with visitors in the building. So I don't know that it should be any different during the school year. Because we have already had that happen.
We know there are some people that are upset about masking and some of the other expectations and so forth, but we've worked so hard this year to be where we are. I think it would be a shame to throw all that out and not continue with the guidelines that are expected, and there are consequences for people that don't follow them. We're adults to kind of laugh, you know.
I've been to a lot of places over the last week that have signs up that say, if you have not been vaccinated, please wear a mask, but I haven't had anybody ask for proof yet. So for visitors that come into the school, couldn't we follow similar? And there's
I
lots
think
of,
that's what they're saying, that we wouldn't ask for proof, we would
Right.
ask, have you been? And, I mean, if you want to get to the rock bottom of this deal, we're keeping honest people honest.
right. And I'm just saying, a lot of businesses are doing it, so it's not like we're taking a huge risk that isn't already being done.
It's no different than from the church, from the grocery store, from a restaurant. And like I said, keeping honest people honest. If somebody's gonna lie to you, they're gonna lie to you. You can have the signage up and you can ask them to do that and behave responsibly, but
I think maybe what I'm hearing you express is that our responsibility is different. When you go to the grocery store, managers of the grocery store do not take you into account. But what you all are saying is elementary school students who may come to school every day. You're there. So I think I understand what you're trying to say there, but you are trying to find a way to protect them because they don't have the choice to be protected by vaccination. Is that correct? That's a really hard phone call to make to a parent that your kid is in quarantine, they're gonna have to stay home. And luckily Dana's shouldered that a lot for us this year and made 99% of those phone calls for us. But we still get the backlash of that. And so I think that's a big thing that we don't ever want to have to make that phone call ever again at all possible because it's horrible. It's horrible to tell a kid, let's get your stuff. And they know I'm gone for 2 weeks. That's hard. So I think if anytime we can avoid that at all possible, that's what we want to do.
So based on what you said earlier, you think if a visitor comes in, obviously they're going through the office, they're gonna come in, we're gonna do a temp check, and we're gonna ask standard 3 or 4 questions like you do if you go to the dentist. You know, have you had a cold? Have you been exposed? Have you been vaccinated? And we're gonna rely on them to tell us, we're gonna, again, keep honest people honest. Hopefully they will be, and based on those answers, we'll determine how we proceed then, whether, you know, they have not and want to have lunch with their kids, maybe we can figure something out and go into an empty room where just them and their kid, and that's okay. But if they have been, we're gonna assume that they told us the truth and we're gonna proceed as normal as possible. If if I can use those words. Am I kind of grasping that somewhat correctly? Thoughts on that? Is that doable? Are you on board with something like that? For visitors that come in? Are we thinking it'll be that way at all the buildings, or are we thinking this is just for the elementary schools?
I'm gonna assume in that scenario, we would be consistent in that district.
Okay.
And that's, that takes into account a lot of the people.
Right.
From the delivery guys, to people like that. There's several that would take into account. They're gonna be moving. I think it's also helpful for them.
Sure. For that consistency.
Right.
Yep.
Is it legal for us to ask if they've been vaccinated? What can we? Yeah, you can ask, they can refuse to tell you, but then they'll have to follow whatever guidelines.
Yeah, if they don't want to answer, then that's an assumed no.
Like refusal of a breathalyzer.
But then we could have the box of masks sitting there just like we always have,
Right.
and it's up to you to make the decision you feel like you need to.
I'm not comparing COVID vaccination and alcohol. I'm saying it's the same precedent set by law enforcement. If they pull you over and ask you your breathalyzer and you refuse it, then it's assumed.
Yeah.
I think that that's important regardless of whatever building we're talking about, because activities aren't necessarily contained just within those buildings. Those kids even migrate. There's that, so if there's an opportunity for mentoring to happen or those kind of things, you've got movement even of students at different times.
So a
So
good example of that is our elementary pathway, CP here at high school goes to elementary school and works with the classroom in that situation. So that would be an example of what we're talking about.
Does visitors, what are activities, does visitors cover activities also? Does all visitors?
I guess I'm gonna see activities as different, just because we're not gonna quiz everybody walking into an activity necessarily. Buy a ticket and have to answer
The
questions.
control is the issue.
Yeah.
Yeah, it isn't. It isn't, or hasn't been.
And there's not compulsory attendance, but even though we still assume the fitness levels for activities, you could say it's a little different scope because they're not mandatory attendance.
Right.
Compulsory attendance that applies to the school day.
But that might be good to have in our wording there.
So I think what I'm hearing you say is this is not. Correct? Right.
Right.
So just during the
School operations.
school day operation, school hours of operation. or school days. Okay, Bryce, put that all.
While everybody's watching.
Yeah, no pressure. So that's how we rephrase that here. So for all buildings in the district, let's start with that.
All buildings.
What they ask us.
Will what?
Will be screened
Will be,
Okay.
there, that's what I was trying to figure out.
on the honor system.
By secretaries or-
By where the school representatives, to be secretary, to be, and it could be whoever's in there. Upon entrance. We would say those who do not pass the screening. We ask for that. The screening would be, we can even list that out.
Quarantine guidelines are in effect, or you're saying?
I don't know where it says.
How would you
I'd
word
say
that?
not.
Let's do answer.
You can say upon refusal of mask, they will be asked to wear a mask or something, or upon answer, I don't
Answering
know.
no. to
Depending on the
screening
answer,
question,
yeah,
you know,
I don't know.
or adversely to the COVID situation. How would you word? Like, what would be our question? Have you been exposed to COVID? Anybody exposed to COVID last whatever days? Have you been vaccinated? Have you had a temperature recently? What are some of the common screening questions?
It'll be, we'll keep it simple. I don't think it could be a short, brief question thing, probably, that all should, you know, or if they answer no to any of those, then they would be asked to wear a mask, or if they refuse, if they answer no or refuse.
Two answers.
Oh, yes, I said it backwards. Sorry. Yes. Okay, so they're not all yes.
Is that something that we want to do, get those questions put together, or do you want our admin to work on that?
What comes to mind is like at the nurse skilled assisted living center, you go in and check in, there's like 4 questions you gotta answer. For instance,
Recent illness or symptoms.
Right. Exposure,
Exposure,
vaccinated.
vaccinated, I mean, traveled and were. Blah, blah, blah.
So is everybody, is the board good with us just finding a common sense, something like that approach, limited question to the point?
Comments in the screening procedure will be used to determine whether a visitor will be asked to wear a mask.
Bryce, do you need a common set of screening questions?
Common sense was the phrase used down here. We can do that. Of screening questions.
Right. We'll get those 4 generic questions.
So going to read the debate of what is common sense.
And then do we need a blurb in there about during the compulsory, let's get a term there.
Yeah. During the hours, school hours of operation. During the hours of school operation for false certificates.
So what happens if a visitor refuses to answer the vaccination question and refuses to put on a mask?
Sorry. So, of course, all this is, now what's the length and duration of this? The rest of them we talked about until vaccine people available in the elementary school like above. So what's the duration? What's the expectation?
I guess my opinion would be to keep that consistent, but conversation about that, but would there be a reason to keep that longer?
Top of the document here, it says the 2021-22 school year. For simplicity.
Well, but if everybody has that opportunity, we
Oh, yeah.
want to stop earlier than that.
Are the vaccines, the ones I saw was 5 years old, but we have preschoolers that are 4 years old. So that,
I mean, does that have to have a timeline, or can we leave it open and then when the vaccine comes out, we revisit? I don't know,
No, I think that makes sense.
Yep.
especially if it's not gonna cover age groups that are in the.
Well, and by that time, who knows, I mean, right now, CDC recommendation is that you wear one if you're unvaccinated, but by that point, that might have changed.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. That's something.
We're doing this again then.
Thank you, Bryce.
I think we just need to make sure we're on the same page to answer questions about that, well, it's a consistency issue as far as the building, it's not a vaccination issue. We've already vaccinated, I had the opportunity to vaccinate high school people. It's still doing the same, so it's a consistency issue.
Yep. But based on what we just talked about a second ago, Mary Kay, going back to your comment, do we want that first line until parents have the option to vaccinate the student? Or do we want, as a board, want to revisit that when we feel the time is appropriate?
Oh, I don't know. I just was trying not to box ourselves into something, later.
Well, why don't we leave it out and then we can always revisit it that way, like I say, because a lot can happen. If nothing may happen, it would be good. And we just, after the board meeting, once vaccination, I would say, let's just drop it off.
Okay. Thoughts on that item C? Any additional comments around what is there?
And I did change the topic, Scott, right point, for this, I added to the start of the 2021 school year. That way it's not misconstrued as being the whole year, yeah.
All right, so before we jump down into social distancing, I'm going to throw another one in here that goes back to Tina Ray's comment about other staff such as custodians, cooks. Do we feel like they can fit into that going back to B? Or do we need something separate for them?
I think custodians are definitely good fit with that. They're not gonna be working with groups of kids. They have to go to the classroom and change filter, and there have to be kids in there. They're not within proximity. They're gonna be there longer than that.
Right.
I don't think custodians, they fit into that. Custodians would be pretty easy.
Our custodians do lunch.
They do much do. That would fit into that. That would be a quarantine situation.
And are also.
Aides and para fit into that. The only one that cooks would probably be the outlier. I was thinking of anything about food preparation. like we talked about. Well, that's, we put it down here at the bottom, but it fits in what we're talking about. Yeah.
All right, so let's, okay, go ahead.
I'm trying to get this straight in my head, the differentiation between staff and visitors and B and C. So the way this reads to me is that we know we will have staff members in the classroom working with students coming in the door every day. We do not have to wear a mask when they come in the door until they're within quarantine guidelines. But we also may know that we will have visitors coming into the building, but they will need to put on a mask when they walk in the door. Is that correct?
If they don't pass through that set of screening questions. There'll be a set of questions, and if any of those come back as not meeting the criteria, then they'll be asked to put on a mask to continue in.
So will staff members be answering those questions?
No, we know the staff is going to be vaccinated.
Right. So the unvaccinated staff,
Well, no vaccination status, and as far as what we talked about, I think our thermometer, our thermostat cameras are still gonna be in the doorway. So again, I think on the honor system, I would hope that if we had a staff member that was, febrile, that they would, they would come and check us. And we've set that forth, all school year, we talked about, if you have any symptoms, you need to be talking to the health office staff in your building. And so that will definitely still be on the table as well, as it always has been, I mean, we just really focused more on it this year. We needed to make sure they were discussing with us if they were ill.
Anything else on number one, masks? All good with those three items?
Okay, so recap, no students will not be required to wear masks. A, B, no mask for staff at C, Council Grove Junior High School because they all had the opportunity to be vaccinated, if they choose. Students have to, elementary until parents have had the choice to vaccinate their students or not mask, unvaccinated staff at the elementary school and working in a quarantine eligible situation. And then C, at all buildings for consistency's sake, visitors will be screened. If they fail that screen or refuse to answer the question screen, will be asked to wear a mask. If they refuse to wear a mask, we will not allow a mask. If they pass the screen, they do not have to wear a mask. So, and the screen would be a set of questions that's very similar to like when you go to a hospital or a nursing home or it's whatever. 4 or 5, 3 or 4 questions. Okay, no, good.
All right, social distancing. We've got the health officer's recommendation there. Based on what we've done up above, do we need to continue the social distancing? At the high school or at the elementary schools? I think we've heard that we'd like to get back to being able to do some of the things that we've always done. Are we ready and able to do that? I think looking at the administrators, I'm seeing lots of nodded heads of please let us go back to what we do. Thoughts from board members?
I would think that what we put in place for question 1 should apply to all 3 of the instances there in section 2. Gives you consistency across the board. You're not saying, well, this applies here, this applies over here. It just makes it a blanket message across the board for all school, all facilities, all situations.
I'm gonna say that I'm not necessarily in disagreement, but I think it's really, really important that everybody, parents and staff members and everybody realizes that we still are under those quarantine guidelines. So, you know, as we move forward with the decisions we're making, as long as people realize that, you know, those phone calls are still gonna be happening for what is right now, unless it changes, you know, before school starts. Those phone calls will still happen for the quarantine, so.
And not keeping stable groups could make our contact tracing affect more children. Does everybody understand the consequences?
And that again could be something that changes before we start in the fall.
Right.
I mean, I don't
Up
know.
or
but-
down?
Right, and that's why I just asked our county health officer and health department just, you know, this last week, what we're looking at for quarantine, and they said as of right now, it stands the same.
I'm gonna go back to the administrative team. I saw a lot of heads shaking. I want your input. That's important to me.
This is probably the hardest one for me because it was a huge change this year, not being able to do small groups, not having the lunchroom the way it normally is, not being able to do table groups and have table work. And the teachers felt it, we felt it as administrators, the kids felt it. So I want to go back to normal and do those things, but it scares me to think about the contact tracing. And so there are some things that I've already thought about. If we do put our lunchroom back the same way, maybe we still have assigned seats and keep kids in the same seats for a week or 2, and then we, you know, like not having just completely random seating. So some things to maybe help with that a little bit, keeping table groups. Like one of the things we did this year with seating arrangements, they had to have their seating arrangements turned into us in the office, and they had to keep them pretty stable for a while. They couldn't be changing their seating arrangements in their classrooms all the time. So some of those things that we've done could help with some of that. But I would like to see at least some things go back to normal, like eating lunch in the lunchroom and not eating lunch in the classrooms. Having small group time.
I agree with Val with the want to go back to normal. Part of my job is supporting new teachers and trying to teach new teachers how to engage students who are spread out 6 feet apart across the room and keep those 5 and 6-year-olds' interest when they're not right there. Like, I didn't do that as a teacher. I had them right there in front of me. So it was challenging. I'm nervous to open it up completely and just get rid of seating charts and have the contact tracing, go crazy. We've talked a lot about the social emotional impact that masks and things like that have had on kids, but I don't think we've talked about, sorry, I'm gonna get a little vulnerable for a second. The impact that quarantining has had on kids. And the 7 weeks of continuous learning for my kids was awful. And they love school, everything about school. And it's for the first time in my life or my child's life, I was worried about mental health. And so we did everything in our power for my children to not have to quarantine. We didn't travel, we didn't wrestle, we didn't do those things. We didn't do basketball because my kids wanted to be in school. And the thought of them getting a call saying you're home for 2 weeks was terrifying to them. And I'm nervous to put them back in that situation again next year, where they don't want to learn from home. They want to be at school. And every kid that walks into our building, the decisions that we're making are deciding if kids are going to be learning from home for 10 days or whatever that is, making that for every kid. And that's hard. So there's another side to the social emotional piece. And there were a lot of people who had to, I'm going to speak for Val, she got to experience some quarantine, multiple rounds of it. And it's hard to manage and it's hard for the kids. And when it hits more than once. So I think, do I want those instructional practices? Yes. Do we need to create some type of system where this cooperative group is always the same? Or this seating arrangement, even though we are close to each other, is always the same and we're not moving desks all of the time? If we do go to other locations, we know what those locations look like. And so it's not this kid is sick and 12 peers are out, it's still 3 peers or 2 or 1, if we can control that a little bit still so that it's not just floodgates and we're still protecting kids from learning from home, because that's also a burden on our teachers to manage that piece. So that's where I'm at.
I appreciate that.
Well, with that being said, do you feel like we need to give you some of those guidelines of what those mitigating things might be? Or should we give the buildings the opportunity to say, here's the things that we want to put in place, whether it be you can't move your desks more than every 2 weeks. I guess I feel like that's getting in the weeds for us. We don't understand your buildings. I would like to give you guys the leeway, in my opinion. I'm one of 7. But if we're going to go that way, I guess I don't want to give you guys, hey, here's what we think you need to do. We could release some of the social distancing guidelines with the caveat that you're going to have some that are specific to your buildings and your situations.
I think you could do that, Terry, and leave it, put an umbrella out there, like expectation of controlling the groups. So we have, kind of like what we did in the beginning before we had to really get down, take teacher desks out of classroom.
Right.
Where it was like, you knew if this kid was kind of being positive, then only this kid could be.
Right.
You had a stable control group. It wasn't a mass free for all. So I think you can set those expectations and each building will figure that out. It's going to look different in each building just because it's your size.
And then you could report that back to us rather than us mandating to you what we think you should do. You could report back to us, hey, here's what we're going to do.
I also think that could look very fluid, because if we have no cases,
Right.
and, and we're doing well, then by all means, get it as much normal as possible. But however, if we have a classroom that has who knows, 5, 6 kids that are ill, then we may need to spread things out a little bit.
So why can't we change the 10 days?
We don't have a statutory authority to do that. That's solely lies with.
So the health department dictates to us exactly what our policy is on that.
The health officer dictates to the county. The health officer reigns over the county, so they.
And they can take back though to the school board in the earlier legislation.
Everything except the quarantine. Yeah. The board, every governing body has ultimate control over everything COVID related except.
And honestly, I know this is a different time because it's COVID, but there is actual guidance policy for every illness, whether it be measles or chickenpox or whatever it may be, within school setting, that things we have to follow and do if students are exposed. So that's, thankfully, it doesn't happen very much because of vaccinations, but COVID-19 kind of made that a little different, but there's always been those regulations as far as what we have to do in the school setting based on health regulations for different diseases.
So the 10 days is going to be different per county or potentially could be different per county, right?
Every health officer has the authority to do what they choose to do.
So I'm hearing the worst case scenario is you get a bunch of kids sent home for 2 weeks. But we have no power over loosening that one. Of the 10 days, you have a contact of someone with COVID and they go home. What was the latest that they developed symptoms? Was it 12 days? Was
And
it
just the
14 days?
cases in our building,
In
I just
that
know for
we've
our,
experienced.
for our building, we had like 2 students this year. Resolved, thankfully, but what within quarantine actually became ill after exposure.
So
But
this is
some of that though, Adam, is, we were masked, we were social distance, we're not gonna be doing that now, so that might look a little bit different. But as of right now, like Mr. Doty said, we don't have jurisdiction to.
I just wanted to make sure that this is not just a self-inflicted thing where we're just sitting here going, well, it's 10 days, but we can't change it.
Well, and they talked about, and there's also the guidance out there from KDHE that the 7 days would test out as well. As of last time, it's been so long since we've had things, goodness, we've not had to deal with that too much, but I think that's something that our health department may look at. It may get lesser and lesser. It's like things that everything else is, kind of slowly gone back to lower numbers and more normalcy. And I'm hoping that happens with quarantine as well.
I think you and Mr. Doty probably talk to the health department the most, right? I would say push them as hard as you can to be realistic. 10 days doesn't seem like it's realistic. It seems like it's the overly cautious approach, but that's,
Well,
you don't want that quarantine situation. Everybody's worried about that.
I would suggest too that it not just be me and Mr. Doty. It should be our community. If there's, it would hold a lot more, coming from a lot more people, sharing their concerns with them rather than just me and Mr. Doty, because we have had lots of conversations. They're probably tired of us at this point. But, the more people that they can have good conversation with, then the more likely they might be to change that.
Adam, and I can tell you, as someone who spent almost 40 days in quarantine because of a child that came home, and then the situation that I welcome 10 days. That's a lot easier for me to deal with than the 40 plus that we dealt with to start with. So the difference, as Dana said, even now versus what it was last October, November, that's 1/4. And I would welcome that over what I had to go through.
Well, and I don't disagree. We talked about, Mr. Doty talked about the sick leave that employees of the district have. It's going away for the most part, it sounds like. That's the same for probably every other business of parents or kids. So, that's a pretty big deal to a lot of families. And so the 10 days it could potentially wreck a lot of people's employment.
I know what you meant, but let's want to make sure for those listening home, it's the Coronavirus Relief Act. Sick leave is going away.
That's what I
know what you meant,
Right.
but yeah, that's.
Yeah. Well, to get us back to to hear. As far as continuing to socially distance students. I'm going to throw it back out there, kind of what I think I heard you say is maybe we don't need a lot of board policy around this social distancing, but with the expectation that the individual buildings will come up with guidelines and report those back to the board. Sound reasonable?
Is that for all buildings, or is that just the elementary, junior high, high school as well?
I think all, and that way, if there needs to be something in the high school, they have the leeway to put that in.
The one step further, Terry, I
Okay.
appreciate that, and I then, once it's brought back to the board, then I think we owe it to buildings to support that. And so if something happens in a building and parents are wild, crazy mad, then we have to be supportive of what we empower them to do. That's just me,
Yep.
I have a lot of trust in these people sitting here, so.
Yep. Thoughts on that?
When do you want us to report that back to?
You know what, let's start it. You jump in, I guess.
I'm a deadline.
Let's start in August, but let's just update it every month as part of your updates. Is that fair?
Yeah, obviously, June with the July will be possible, because they're most of them are off contract.
Right.
So it obviously.
Take a few days now.
Yeah, yeah, if and when quarantine guidelines change, then you can update them as well. Board members' thoughts, comments? Lunchtime procedures, any difference? Are we okay with doing the same thing there? Leaving it up to the buildings? I'm gonna base that then, that we're okay with leaving it up to the buildings. Hearing nothing different.
The biggest thing there is to make sure we understand there'll be some inconsistencies between buildings, so we don't get one building, a parent say, how come they're doing that over there versus that?
Yep.
So we just need to support that it looks different in every building, because every building is different, size, culture, community, all that. So we just need to understand that. There'll be some people that will be upset about that if there's inconsistency. And that's okay. We just need to be able to support that.
Okay, anything else on socially distancing? Okay, moving to transportation. Are masks necessary on buses transporting students to and from school? I assume you're talking about students in this question. I'm not asking them to put them on any other time. We want to stay consistent with that. Okay. So I'm seeing lots of heads nod that no masks for kids on buses. Any agreement?
Can I ask if we will have some type of consistent seating for contact tracing?
Yeah.
Rice is too nice.
We think she just threw you under the bus.
We found
The proverbial bus.
seating charts on buses are almost impossible to enforce, because there's just so many variables that happen. When you have a driver, you have multiple stops, kids getting on, kids getting off. It's almost impossible. If we had an aide on the bus, every bus, different story. But just expecting that driver to manage safety driving, yet kids on the bus and then leasing in the back, we found it was next to impossible. Some were better than others, but it'd be tough. I think it'd be better off to maybe ask kids that, again, but this gets back to, where do you draw a line in segregating vaccinations? But if you ask kids that set by family units again, at least, and try to ask them to do that, and then they can police themselves to someone, that gets difficult too. When you have a sub driver who got on, and then the kids decide, I want to go sit with my buddy, and then the sub driver doesn't know who to, and then it gets all out of filter again.
We can't control what they're doing before and after anyway, so if they're standing around and getting ready to get on the bus, or they get off the bus, and then they run over to the buddy's house, they're intermingling as it is.
But we had to make the the calls about, we had some pretty significant quarantines that happened because the morning bus route, they were by this person and these seats in front and behind and beside, and then the afternoon route, they were behind this person in front and behind and beside. Then the next day, those people were different, and so it just kept multiplying how many students ended up in quarantine from one case.
And I understand that.
And those are the calls we have to make, and when they're at their friend's house or wherever afterwards, that's not on us.
Except, I understand, I mean, I think, Mr. Doty, how do you control that?
Right.
If you're, even if we try to control it on the bus, as soon as they get off the bus, they're intermingling as it is. All that contact tracing we did on the bus goes out the window as soon as they get off the bus.
I think what Kelsey's saying, unfortunately, we're the ones that held accountable while they're on the bus to go.
Right. You got, hey, you want to try to wrangle that cat, go ahead.
I think we should at least attempt seating arrangements on the bus. Obviously, we know it's not gonna be perfect, especially if there's a sub driver or something, but at least if we can say, we tried it, I mean, what's the harm in that?
Well, there is none, but I just want to make sure, because I don't like to tell parents something we can't follow through on. And I felt really bad this year when we had to make some phone calls because we told parents we were going to pick kids by family units and have X, Y, and Z on the bus, and then find out we didn't. And then in visiting the drivers and Bryce, it was like, at first it went from a kind of more of a upset, why aren't we doing this, to, oh, I see now why. Because I became more informed in visiting with them and the challenges they had. It wasn't out of neglect, it was out of just circumstances that were usually really hard for them to control. And so I just want to make sure if we do that, I think it doesn't hurt to try. We just need to make sure parents understand there's no guarantee that this won't always be the case. And they'll have to help us with their own kids. They'll have to make sure they're having conversations with their own kids about, hey, don't slide the seat over when you have the opportunity. You know, make sure you're following the rules on the bus too. And if there's a assigned seat, they're doing their diligence to help support us. But I just don't want to, like Kelsey and Dave were saying, making those phone calls, about, especially when you're talking to the parent, well, you told me kids would be by the family. Yes, we did. I'm sorry, but it didn't work out that way. That's, I don't like doing that. So as long as we're front parents saying that there's no guarantee, we do the best of our ability, but the buses are really hard to control that.
It also allowed us to have conversations with students at school that I had students come up to me and tell me, this kid on the bus keeps switching seats and they're not staying in their spot that they're supposed to be in. And it was making that student on the bus nervous. And so then I can have a conversation with the student who's moving on the bus and say, stay in your. So it, not necessarily a discipline thing, but an expectation.
I'll speak out I'm gonna talk to what Bryce and Aaron have said, because my kids were quarantined on the bus, and my kids said, I'm with Aaron and Bryce, I don't think it's feasible. My kids sat in the same seats on the bus every day, and it didn't matter. There were kids jumping into their seats. My kids missed the whole Christmas break being quarantined. So I guess I'm just gonna go with Bryce and Aaron. I don't think, because we went through that. I went through on activities, taking pictures every time our kids sat down, and in the end, the seating charts on the bus
I don't
were
think
not effective.
I don't think it hurts to try, but yeah, that was on Michelle's bus. She's one of my best, most diligent drivers. But when she's watching kids at a stop to make sure she's not going to run over a kid will switch back to seat. And then at the next stop, we'll do it again.
She's driving a bus.
Yeah, to ask the drivers.
The other thing is, the only way you can do that is the only way a seating chart will work on a bus is if no other kid ever at any point gets on that bus.
And you have somebody on the back going, hey,
You'd have to test.
It's not.
Every bus.
It's different kids every day, and her bus is one of the most packed. It's just, yeah, it doesn't hurt to try, but it's almost impossible.
Could we add the line from up above to this, that we might have to make an adjustment? I mean, if we start to have a bunch of quarantines from the bus, we might have to rethink that.
Absolutely.
And see, I think that goes without
You
saying
know
for
what I
all of
mean?
it. I realize I don't have to say it, but
Right, I know we have to, but I'm just saying, if the quarantines start happening because of the bus situation, we might have to rethink the bus. And if that's all that happens next year, in my opinion, we're doing great. So,
And I think there's
I
nothing
just-
wrong with setting those expectations.
Yeah.
Telling kids set by family units, set by don't switch seats. You know, those are bus rules anyhow. And if they do, if they switch seats, it's, we have to have parents. We just can't guarantee it. We won't tell them it's something we can enforce, but we're gonna try. We're gonna try to make it a practice, but it's.
Aaron, do we need to make some kind of announcement that we're going to start the regular meeting?
Yeah, but why don't we start the regular meeting and then do a recess to finish this?
Okay.
And then,
All right, so right now it's 6:34. I realize we're a couple of minutes late for those of you watching online. But we're gonna call the regular meeting to order. We're still finishing up our work session. So we're gonna finish this real quick and then we'll probably take a short break. So in just a few minutes, we'll have some idea of how long that break will be. And we can update you on our official time to start the official meeting. But as of right now, we are officially in session with our regular meeting. Okay, so, well, can we go ahead and finish this? And then take a recess?
yeah, you want to add to the agenda item, agenda, so we want to add it. And
We
then the
need to take
agenda
a recess to address this. And
Yeah,
then
we
come back.
have to discuss how our regular board meeting.
Okay, to come back to this, okay.
The motions on
I move
recess.
that we take a recess out of our regular board meeting to continue our guiding questions in our work study.
Moved and seconded that we take a recess from the regular meeting to continue discussing the questions, guiding questions in the work session. Discussion on that item. All in favor, raise your right hand. All opposed? All right, so coming back to this, to paraphrase this a little bit, are masks necessary on buses transporting students to and from school? And right now, from a board perspective, we're going to say no, but we're going to try to put some kind of the word I'm looking for.
Wouldn't be a policy, but just some guiding principles that would
Help minimize quarantine.
Yes.
Yeah, exposure.
And we would call on the students and parents and staff all work together to help enforce.
As a question,
Mhm.
did you have any luck all the last school year coming up with a policy or a principle or anything that would minimize quarantine?
No.
So,
Well, we had policy procedures that would work if they could be followed. Like the assigned seats and family units, that helps control it, but like shared.
But it's not working.
Right.
It didn't work all last school year.
There would have been more quarantines if we didn't have
Yeah,
any.
I wouldn't say it wasn't totally ineffective.
Okay.
It just didn't stop it from happening.
Okay, so it kind of works, that's what you're saying.
Yeah, enforcing is the challenge.
Yeah.
All right, other thoughts on the masks for kids on buses? All right, moving on to B. Do non-vaccinated drivers need to wear a mask on bus routes with students under 12 until the option is available? All right, I guess my question is how many buses do we have that we have kids within that 6-foot bubble on those routes?
Well, that would be a thing we could control. We could tell to make sure if we have a couple that are full, but the routes that aren't full, leave those seats empty.
Right.
behind, so there is a 6-foot distance. Yeah. We could
And does
control
that cover that
Yeah.
in that scenario?
It would just be the buses that are full. I mean, that's the express bus back and forth full, yellow, 2 or 3 that are full. Yeah.
To at least, yeah, just use the same language where it's when they're working around kids. Within the quarantine, or that quarantine distance.
So we use the same one as up here. Yeah, that's
Fair and doable.
makes sense.
Board members, thoughts, comments on that? All right, other items that you've thought of that we haven't discussed tonight? that won't wait till July? Okay, hearing none. Before we adjourn from our recess, good meeting. That was good. Thank you all for your input. It's nice to all be back in the room where we can have this kind of dialogue. So thank you very much.
We do have food. I know none of that eat supper, so I did have, there's some BG's tacos and sliders over there, so.
So we'll just remain in our recess. We will officially start 6:55 or 7. 7 o'clock, we will officially start the meeting. For those of you online,
We'll shut this link down and open up more meetings.
okay. And when we do that, can we just put something on there? Can we just put a little note up that says we will officially start at 7? So if somebody logs into that, they'll know we're at recess.
We'll put it on the Facebook.
Okay. All right. Very good. Thank you.
Stay at home.